Unmasking the past, the shocking truth behind my wife's secret obsession. I never expected my life to turn upside down on an ordinary Monday afternoon. I was home alone with our daughter while my wife Bailey was at work. The day was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the calm were a prelude to the storm about to hit. My laptop battery had died unexpectedly. So, without a second thought, I reached for Bailey's tablet, something we'd always shared casually. We never asked permission to use each other's devices, our trust was implicit. But this time, that sense of openness betrayed me. As I opened the internet browser, something caught my eye, a tab in incognito mode, still active. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than a reminder of her work habits. Maybe she had used it for something trivial or had simply forgotten to close it. I was about to dismiss it when curiosity nudged me to click. What I discovered in that click still haunts me. An unfamiliar Google account had been logged in, with a photo album prominently labeled XX. My mind raced. Had she been hiding something this entire time? A flash of jealousy, anger, and confusion washed over me. But I pushed it down. The only way to know for sure was to open it. As I scrolled through the album, my stomach dropped. Hundreds of photos stared back at me, each one carefully saved, organized, and archived. But these weren't just any photos, they were pictures of my ex-girlfriend. Yes, my ex, whom I had left behind long before meeting Bailey. And yet, here she was, etched into this secret digital archive. Bailey and I met 9 years ago through mutual friends. It was one of those instant connections that you hear about in love stories. We laughed, shared stories, and discovered a shared love for small-town life. Sunsets over the mountains, and little things that made life feel whole. After a long, toxic relationship, Bailey had been my refuge. I had barely escaped a dark past, and I thought I'd found a partner who would be my fresh start. My safe place. I had left every trace of my past relationship behind. My ex had been someone I cut out of my life completely. Along with every memory, every token, and certainly every digital trace, she had left scars on my heart that took years to heal. Bailey had known about her, but only in fragments I shared here and there, always painting my ex in the worst light. I thought Bailey understood, yet here, before me, lay proof that Bailey had somehow unearthed every detail about my past love. There were hundreds of images, ranging from innocent family gatherings to public events and even intimate, candid shots of my ex from long before I met Bailey. There were photos of her at her workplace, in crowds where only she was zoomed in on, her face grainy from the resolution but unmistakable. There were pictures of her on vacation, relaxing with friends, and in places only close family members could have known about. Bailey had gone to unfathomable lengths to collect these. My heart pounded, wondering just how much my wife knew about this chapter I thought I'd closed forever. In the days following my discovery, I felt the world I'd built with Bailey begin to crack. Our life together, once so solid and unwavering, felt suddenly fragile. I would catch her glancing at herself in the mirror, adjusting her hair in a style that now, disturbingly, mirrored my ex's. Her choice of clothes, her interests, her hobbies, they all seemed to echo my past. Had she been wearing this mask all along, molding herself into the shadow of my former lover? Or had she, over the years, subtly taken on these traits? Little things I once dismissed as new quirks or personal growth now struck me as something more sinister. When I asked Bailey about her new interests, she would answer with enthusiasm, talking about how she had always wanted to try this or that. Her stories felt real, or at least real enough. But now I questioned everything. Each word felt like it could be hiding something deeper. After nearly a week of internal turmoil, I knew I couldn't carry the weight alone. I arranged for our daughter to spend the day with her grandmother, leaving Bailey and me alone at the house. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I took a breath and told her I had discovered the album. Her face turned pale, and her hands trembled as she struggled to find words. I pressed her gently but firmly, demanding an explanation. Through broken sobs, Bailey began to confess. She told me she had stumbled upon my ex's profile one day, purely out of curiosity. Her story sounded simple at first, like a harmless look into the past. But as she spoke, it was clear that this had gone beyond curiosity. She explained how, at first, it had been a game to her, a way to feel connected to me. as if understanding this person from my past would help her understand me better. But over time, that curiosity morphed into something darker, an obsession that began to take over her life. She would search tirelessly, piecing together fragments of my ex's life through social media, hunting down specific clothes, hairstyles, even gestures that she imagined might make her more right for me. Over the weeks that followed, Bailey and I plunged into a journey of counseling and therapy, seeking answers for her behavior and a way forward for us. We learned that her actions were rooted in insecurity, magnified by the shadow my past relationship had cast over our life together. She admitted she had struggled with feelings of inadequacy for years, feelings I had never fully understood. Bailey promised to delete the album, vowing to sever the last links to this distorted past she had crafted for herself. I watched her carefully, still harboring a sliver of doubt that she could truly let go. But I wanted to believe her. After all, we had a family, a life, and years of memories that deserved a chance to heal. As the months passed, I found myself grappling with a new understanding of trust. Love, I realized, is fragile, vulnerable to the deepest insecurities we harbor within ourselves. Bailey's actions hurt, but they also illuminated a hidden pain she had buried for years. Her journey to mimic my ex wasn't a reflection of her love for me. It was a symptom of a deeper wound. One that therapy, patience, and time could begin to mend. Our story taught me that sometimes the shadows of the past are never fully gone until we confront them head-on. In the end, I chose to stay, to rebuild the trust we had lost and to give her, and as, a second chance. The true cost of friendship when generosity turns into a nightmare. I grew up with a deep understanding of scarcity. Some of my earliest memories revolve around the constant reminder of, not enough. We didn't have much, but my parents did the best they could with what little we had. There were days where meals were nothing more than beans and rice. And luxuries were simply out of the question. Yet, through these struggles, I learned resilience and the value of hard work. I promised myself that one day, I would rise above these circumstances, not just for myself but to create a stable life for my future family. Determined to break the cycle, I began working early on. Through high school, I balanced studies with part-time jobs, carefully saving every penny I could. My routine was grueling, but I knew it would pay off. I skipped social events, walked instead of driving, and resisted the urge to spend frivolously. By the time I moved out of my parents' home, I had managed to save over $17, a small fortune for someone in my position. Over the years, I continued to build on that foundation, setting up investments and emergency funds, and eventually marrying a man who shared my financial discipline. Together, we made careful, calculated decisions about our finances, ensuring that we'd never fall back into the life of scarcity I had once known. In 2015, we reached a major milestone. We bought our first home. We went in 50-50 with my husband's mother, who contributed a portion, which we agreed to pay back. Over time, we paid off our share, and the house was officially ours. It was a charming 4-bedroom, 2-story home with a spacious yard, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. We loved every inch of it, and though it wasn't perfect, it was ours. We put our heart and soul into that house, making updates and repairs, bringing it closer to the cozy home we envisioned. Around this time, I reconnected with an old friend from childhood, Carly. Carly and I had shared similar struggles growing up, which I assumed meant we would understand each other's values. Carly, however, had never quite gotten the hang of saving or budgeting. Despite working decent jobs, she never managed to keep more than $50 in her account. And it seemed every payday turned into a spending spree. I spent countless hours with Carly, trying to help her set up budgets and savings plans, hoping she'd learn to manage her finances better. Each time, though, it ended the same way, with Carly overspending and back to square one. My frustration grew, but I didn't want to abandon a friend. I remembered how difficult life could be without support, and I wanted to be there for her, even if it was exhausting. When my husband and I finally purchased our forever home, just a 5-minute drive from our first house, Carly approached us with an idea. She wanted to rent our old home. At first, it seemed like a perfect arrangement. Carly was excited, and she had plans to move in with 2 other friends, which would help her manage the rent. The deal was good for everyone, as it provided us with some passive income, and Carly would have a safe, affordable place to stay. Looking back, the red flags were already there. Carly referred to the house as her own even before she moved in, casually dropping phrases like, "I can't wait to decorate my house." At the time, I brushed it off as enthusiasm. But soon enough, her words would reveal a deeper assumption of ownership that would complicate everything. By the time the lease was finalized, Carly's 2 roommates had already backed out, leaving her to handle the entire rent on her own. I adjusted the rent to accommodate her circumstances, reducing it far below the market rate, something I did because she was my friend. In my mind, this was a temporary solution. Carly just needed a bit of a nudge, a small favor, and she'd be able to get on her feet. Over the next few years, however, I watched Carly's sense of entitlement grow. She took over the house, setting her own rules and discouraging anyone else from moving in. The house became her domain, her personal space where she dictated everything, from who could enter to how things were arranged. I began to see the mess she left behind every time I visited. Clothes, boxes, and miscellaneous items covered the floors, and the space seemed to spiral into chaos within days of my attempts to help her organize. No matter how many times I cleaned and organized, she let it fall into disarray almost immediately. It wasn't just about clutter, it was a sign of deeper issues with responsibility and respect. As the years passed, Carly's financial irresponsibility became even more glaring. Despite landing a well-paying job at a local university, she continued to struggle with rent, frequently falling behind due to unexpected expenses or miscalculations. At one point, she owed me over $750 in back rent, which she eventually paid off with the help of her new boyfriend, Reggie. Reggie was a retired Marine with a stable income, and when Carly mentioned that he was interested in buying the house, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the solution. Reggie seemed stable, responsible, and willing to invest in the property. Yet, once again, my hopes were dashed. Despite his initial interest, Reggie was unable to secure a loan, and when October came around, they informed us that they wouldn't be able to buy the house after all. Carly, however, refused to let go of her dream of owning the property. She began making outlandish offers, suggesting we transfer the deed for little to nothing or let her purchase it for an amount far below market value. At one point, she even suggested a price of just $1. I laughed it off at the time, but inside, I was fuming. Carly's disregard for the value of the house, our house, was beyond insulting. Our frustration grew as Carly and Reggie continued to test our patience. Carly's behavior only worsened as time went on. She went so far as to suggest charging us for storing a few items in the garage. Items that were there only because she refused to let anyone else enter the house to pick them up. And yet, despite her financial struggles, Carly managed to splurge on 2 new tattoos and an international vacation. She quit her job, claiming it was too stressful, and assumed Reggie's military stipend would be enough to cover their expenses. When they informed us they wouldn't be buying the house, it was the final straw. We decided not to renew their lease, and I contacted a lawyer to explore our options for eviction. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Carly had been my friend, but her entitlement and lack of respect had crossed every boundary I had tried to set. I realized that my kindness had enabled her behavior, and that I had been blind to the ways she took advantage of my generosity. After informing Carly of our decision, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew this was the end of our friendship, but it was a necessary step for my own well-being. Carly and Reggie moved out on April 1st, leaving the house in shambles. The mess they left behind was a physical representation of the chaos they had brought into my life. And as I surveyed the damage, I felt a sense of closure. It was a painful experience, but it taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the true cost of friendship. In the end, I learned that generosity has its limits. Helping others is important, but when kindness is met with entitlement and disrespect, it's necessary to set firm boundaries. I've since started therapy, working on overcoming my people-pleasing tendencies and learning to prioritize my own well-being. This experience has changed me, but it has also made me stronger. I now know that true friendship is built on mutual respect and appreciation, not on taking advantage of someone's kindness. A mother's heartbreak learning to let go. I never imagined myself here, sitting in a quiet, empty house, wondering where I went wrong, wondering if I failed my only child. They say that raising a child is like giving your heart permission to roam the world outside of you, open to all the beauty and dangers of life. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't always protect them. Sometimes, you have to let them go. It started when my daughter turned 16. She had always been different, sensitive, intelligent, and introspective. One evening, over dinner, she nervously told me she identified as non-binary, that some days she felt more like a boy, other days like neither. It took me a moment to absorb it all. I'd always thought I'd understand my child. After all, wasn't I the one who raised her? Who knew her every laugh, every tear? And yet, this was new, something I hadn't expected. She asked me to call her by different pronouns each day, depending on how she felt. I remember nodding, trying to understand, but something in me felt lost. I loved her, and I wanted her to be happy. But I also felt like I was being asked to play a game I didn't know the rules to. I told her I would do my best to respect her wishes. But I couldn't guess every day. I needed her to tell me how she felt. This arrangement worked for a while, but it wasn't long before she grew tired of explaining. Eventually, she settled on she, though she reminded me that she still identified as non-binary. I accepted this, happy to see her smile, hoping things would become simpler. But things didn't get easier. They got harder. She turned 18, and it felt like she was drifting away. She was full of dreams but struggling with reality, unable to hold down a job, claiming that people were phobic because of her non-binary identity. She would come home upset, claiming the world didn't understand her. I encouraged her to keep trying, to go back to school. But every attempt ended the same way, with frustration, anger, and, often, resignation. And then came the news that changed everything. She was pregnant. I remember that day clearly. She was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. She told me she was pregnant, and the words felt like a punch in the gut. I was too stunned to speak, the questions racing through my mind like a storm. I thought of the responsibilities, the life-changing decisions, the sacrifices she would have to make. But she quickly clarified that she wasn't planning on raising the baby. She viewed it as more of a sibling, someone for me to care for, someone for me to raise. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at her, searching for any hint of understanding, any sign that she knew what she was asking of me. But she was firm. She insisted that this was my responsibility, that I was obligated to raise this child as my own. My heart broke, not just because of her words but because I realized how deeply she had misunderstood the concept of responsibility. This wasn't just about me or her, it was about a new life. One that deserved love, stability, and commitment. The conversation quickly spiraled into a heated argument. She accused me of failing her, of not putting her on puberty blockers when she was younger, as if that decision could have somehow prevented this. Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told her that this wasn't something I could take on. I explained that she needed to take responsibility, that this was her child, her future. She looked at me like I was the enemy, and I felt the last threads of our bond fraying. After that, things only grew worse. She withdrew from me, locked herself in her room for hours on end, sometimes even days. When she did come out, it was usually to argue, to remind me of my obligations. She had stopped working, stopped planning for school, clinging to the idea that I would eventually change my mind and take on the role of the parent to her child. But I couldn't do that. I knew it would only enable her to avoid the consequences of her choices. Then one night, after another explosive argument, she packed her things and left. She didn't tell me where she was going, only that she was leaving. I sat in silence after she walked out, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The house felt too quiet, too empty, as if the very air had been drained of warmth. I told myself she would come back, that she just needed time to cool off. But deep down, I knew that things had changed. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't hear from her. I worried. Of course, I worried about the choices she was making, the people she might be with, the influences she might be under. I heard from a mutual friend that she had joined a group of people with unconventional beliefs. People who didn't believe in traditional responsibilities or family roles. They encouraged her to see the world differently, to reject anything that felt too normal or expected. And then, one evening, my phone rang. It was her, telling me she was in labor. She didn't ask me to come, she just wanted me to know. I held my breath, wondering if this was the moment she would finally realize the gravity of the situation. I waited, hoping she would call back, that she would ask for my help, that she would take the first steps toward becoming the mother her child needed. But she didn't. Instead, she left the hospital the same day, abandoning her newborn child there, choosing freedom over responsibility. When the hospital called to ask if I wanted custody, I felt my heart shatter. This was my grandchild, a part of my own flesh and blood. Yet I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't take on the responsibility she had so carelessly cast aside. I told the hospital no and I hung up the phone, feeling as though I had lost a piece of my soul. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of it all. I tried to understand where things had gone wrong, why my daughter had chosen this path, why she couldn't see the love and sacrifice it takes to raise a child. I wrote letters to my grandchild, words that they may never read, but words that helped me process my grief. I poured my love into those letters, wishing my grandchild the life I couldn't give them. And as for my daughter, I continued to hold hope, though it grew fainter each day. She would visit occasionally, sharing tales of her new family, the people who understood her in ways I never could. Each visit was a reminder of the chasm between us, a reminder of the daughter I had lost. She no longer looked like the girl I had raised. She was a stranger, someone I could barely recognize. I don't know if she will ever come back to me, if she will ever understand the choices I made, the boundaries I had to set. But I know this: love is not always about holding on. Sometimes, love means letting go, even when it breaks your heart. And so, I let her go, hoping that someday she might find her way back. In the meantime, I focus on healing, on finding peace in the memories we shared, in the laughter and love that once filled this house. I remind myself that I did the best I could, that I loved her with everything I had, and perhaps, in some way, that love will reach her, even from afar. For now, I walk through these quiet rooms, the echoes of her childhood laughter still lingering in the walls, and I whisper a silent prayer, for her, for my grandchild, and for the love that endures, even when the heart is broken.